digits where I'm at. Oh my god, my
I mean,
foot,
I'm
that's
in
funny.
Georgia, so I get it. I definitely get the heat issue.
Well, you guys have humidity, so that's even worse, but, yeah, it's like triple digits, and even by triple digits, it's like in the 110s, so it's like we're in the middle of a really, really bad heat wave, so,
You live
um
in an oven, apparently.
right now I do. Um, but yeah, so, I just wanna preface this by saying, like, I'm super, like, grateful and honored that you're like talking to me. I'm really nervous. I always get nervous for stuff like this. Especially because like all the women that you've interviewed before me are like so well spoken, and I'm not. I tend to I'm unmedicated ADHD, so I tend to ramble and I'll have like five thoughts at once that I can't put into like one coherent thought. So I'm a little bit all over the place. You'll have to forgive me.
Well, one of the things that I love about these, I use interview loosely because it's really just like a conversation with somebody who vaguely agrees with you on like an ideological level. So it's not meant to be some formal thing. I really just like having
Oh
these
yeah.
they're conversations with other Radfems, of people who believe in a similar worldview as you. And that's something that I love to record because it's like being radical feminist is inherently lonely because you're having an opinion that goes against the grain. And then when you just meet somebody who's like, yes, I agree with you. Biological sex is a real thing. It's just an amazing connection.
I agree. I agree. And I really like this format that the very casual type of just conversation, like, oh, just two besties talking. But yeah, I really like that. And yeah, when I found your channel, I was like in a way, I'm like, I kind of hope she blows up, but only in like the Radfem sphere, because if you get way too big, then it's like then you get then it could then you get a lot of nonsense that comes with it. But yeah, when I found your channel and I immediately subbed to it, and I'm like, and the thing that made me really happy, like I've articulated this to you before, um, and from hearing some of the other interviews, I'm so glad there's like this younger generation of women, particularly like LGB women, like lesbian women, bisexual, what have you, um, not queer. We don't use the word queer. Yeah, and like I'm just it's I just love that there's more, you know what I mean? There's more of us in the younger there's some more of us in the younger generation, cuz that's what it's going to take to really you know beat down this whole gender ideology thing. So I just want to say I'm very happy and I'm very proud of you women. So
I mean, one thing that I really love about this is just getting to talk with people who are older than me. Because on one hand, I know that I'm only 21, but I feel ancient sometimes in comparison to people my own age because I've just had to deal with so many adult responsibilities at a younger age. And it's always really nice to talk to people who are older than me because it's kind of like it's like being able to see a goal to aim towards, especially like some of the past interviews I've done. Most, I think everyone I've interviewed has actually been at least 2 or 3 years older than me, and it's like looking at like a path. Like this is someone who is happy and who is ahead of me, and that's something to aim towards. And I feel like in general we don't really put older women on a pedestal, and I don't mean older in like a negative way or anything. It's just that
no,
we
I totally know what you get. Yeah, know what you mean. And I also, you know what I really like about um like lesbian like forums and communities and stuff like that is older women are I don't want to say put on a pedestal, but they're valued. We don't get degraded for our look, for getting older and quote unquote hitting the wall. Like if anything, we're just valued. The older you get, the more you're kind of valued because you like have the age and the wisdom, and you can impart that on the younger lesbians and stuff. I'm not a lesbian. Like I'm not lesbian. I'm bisexual. I say that I'm bisexual with a preference for women because I have no interest in sorry, there's a guy walking by my car. I'm just like, oh man, god damn it. Sorry, like I said, I'm in my car and I'm parked. But anyways, yeah, I have no intention of having a relationship, you know, having a relationship or having any kind of like sexual like encounters with men, like that's it. I'm done, you know? Like unfortunately I still find myself attracted to them, but so yeah, so I'm bisexual, but I'll give kind of like my background. I grew up in a kind of well, I grew up in a white liberal family. I say white even though I am half Mexican. I'm Mexican on my dad's side of the family, but we are light skinned. And we like half of my dad's family like has lived in the country for like my dad's been like lived here for years and years. So I mean, for all yeah. So I grew up in a white liberal family. My parents were like hippies in the 60s and 70s. So I always kind of grew up with that uh with those kind of like those I don't know, liberal val I don't it's because liberal can mean so many different things, but it's like, always grew up very like, anti-racism, anti-bigotry, and you know what I mean? Like very pro-gay, pro-women.
Open-minded, basically,
Yeah,
just really
very
open-minded.
open-minded. And I went to middle school and high school in the early to late 90s. When I was in when I was in 8th grade, my one of my best friends at the time came out as a she was open and out as a lesbian, and she was pretty much the only one, especially in our class and grade level, that was out as gay or gay or lesbian. And so that was kind of a huge deal, and she took a lot of shit about that. And because I was friends with her and hung out with her, they're like, "Oh, you must be a dyke too," all that kind of shit. But I look back on it now and I was like, "Wow, dude, like I'm really proud that she was able to feel comfortable doing that at such a young age." So even though I've grown up, I live in the Silicon Valley, which is right by San Francisco Bay Area. So I've kind of it has I've grown up pretty like in gay friendly communities, but at the same time, like these were um it was different from how it is now. Like not every single person was identifying as gay or queer. Even like you would definitely not use the word queer back then. um or maybe you would, I don't know. But so yeah, so
I really feel like queer is more of a modern invention. Like, I know that some people have reclaimed slurs, and I do think that's more of an individual choice than like, you can't force other people to reclaim a slur. It's an individual choice. And even then, I don't think there really is a way to reclaim a slur because you can never erase the original meaning. And so, yes, there
yeah.
are people who are proudly like, I'm a dyke or, whatever. And that's fine. If you want to call yourself that, that's fine. But queer has been taken on a societal level. Like they call it queer studies. Like when companies make like
Queer friendly.
commercials nowadays, they're going, this is for the queer community. You go to like an
Yeah.
LGBT club on like campus and they're talking about the queer community. And no, we didn't agree to that. That wasn't like a societal group thing that we all agreed to. Yeah, we're fine with being called this. In the same way that like I would never like I'm biracial and I would never refer to my own community as the colored community. Like that's just, if you put it in any other
Yeah, or
context,
now
it
it's
just sounds
I
stupid.
know that from talking to a lot of from well, hearing a lot of black women talk about it, saying that like, yeah, I find the term people of color when they're referring to black people offensive, because that was very offensive to like my parents and grandparents generation. And like, no, I'm not a person of color or a woman of color. I'm a black woman, and I totally get that, um and here's just to show like, here's it just goes to show like what like how much of a male dominated society we live in, is that like I said, so I've always been kind of plugged into the gay community, like here in the South Bay and also in San Francisco. Like a lot of my friends live in San Francisco, but I feel like in San Francisco, queer has been very much like the word queer has been very much embraced, but it's mostly been embraced by gay men. And because of the fact that it's like a lot of the younger generation that's kind of we're the ones that are kind of bringing it back. They kind of like, I don't know how to put this, but like they want to like embrace like youth culture a lot. Like they're so like gay men are worse than women when it comes to like they can be very ageist like in their dating, and sex lives very ageist and like very like, oh my god, I'm getting old, oh my god, I'm 40 years old, I'm so old, and so they kind of try to like embrace youth culture to, I guess, counteract that. So I think, but as far as I feel like it's a lot of the gay men that are trying to reclaim queer as opposed to older older not non-male people in the gay community.
I do feel like, I don't know, certain demographics lean towards certain topics, I'd suppose. Like, on one hand, I kind of feel like same sex attracted women have been left out of the conversation in regards to not just language, but just in general. We've been left out of the
Oh,
conversation.
absolutely.
If you look back on like gay history, like no one talks about how lesbians and bi women did a lot of the caretaking during the AIDS epidemic. It's not like a widely known detail of that period.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And it's,
um
it's something that's interesting because, I mean, historically there was no need to put into law like anti-female homosexuality because we were already restricted by the laws of the patriarchy. There was no need to already, criminalize female homosexuality when we couldn't own bank accounts or own property anyway. It was redundant to even consider that.
mhm.
And it's just something that's interesting to see kind of push forward to today because in a lot of the conversation about homophobia or about just social issues in general, women's issues are kind of set aside as if they don't exist at all. It's a trend, a historical trend of our issues being silenced or considered non existent.
And another thing about not wanting to lift up or amplify gay women's voices, I actually was I'm always like forever watching documentaries on YouTube, but I got on this kick for a while watching the HIV AIDS documentaries from like back when it first started happening, and it's really a big eye opener to see the difference back then as in today. Like I didn't even know at the time when it first came out, like it was just AIDS, and they didn't have a way to test for it. And even the like preliminary tests that came out for it, there was like it took a while before there was an actual HIV test. Like they could test you for AIDS but not HIV. It's really weird. Anyways, I'm going off on a tangent, but there was this one documentary that I watched where they interviewed the lesbian, and it was during that time, so it wasn't like interviewing them like now and they're recalling it. It was like the interviews from back then, and a lot of the gay women were actually pretty resentful, and I would say deservingly so, because they were kind of because of, when AIDS came out and everything, it was a gay disease, and it was all like, and so that gave a lot of like the religious right fuel to be like, oh, these people are degenerates, and we need to, hopefully like AIDS will wipe them out, and just, all the horrible things that you hear about. But like women were kind of, lesbians were kind of being lumped in, even though they were the caretakers, and because honestly, they weren't really unless you were like an IV drug user, you weren't, if you're a woman, if you were a lesbian, you weren't catching you weren't catching it. So yeah, they were definitely the caretakers of the gay men, but at the same time, it's like they're like, you know, we don't want to be like lumped in with these men. Like we're not the ones that are out there having bareback sex and having these crazy sex parties, knowing that there's this disease out there that's killing people, because at that time it was killing people like severely, and it was just a really interesting take that I had never even considered before. But knowing what I know now, I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I felt a lot of like empathy and solidarity towards them, because I was like, I understand like why, they were just like, they were very disgusted with how gay men were acting so cavalierly even during this health crisis. And even though it's different now, because AIDS, HIV isn't really part of the conversation anymore, but um, now gay women are becoming resentful of gay men because gay men are not being in our corner trying to fight this gender ideology stuff. Even after like lesbians were there for them during the AIDS crisis. I mean, they certainly weren't like outspoken about being resentful or angry at gay men, and they were helping them. They were, doing their part to show solidarity. So I definitely get and can I can definitely get and sympathize with the resentment.
It's
I just
something
thought that was
that's
interesting.
interesting to me because it feels like to a certain extent I feel like the gender ideology primarily harms women, and of course there are like the Thames who also, I mean TEH, I don't know how you pronounce that in a way that's distinguishable from Thames as in trans-identified males, but you know what I mean, the trans exclusionary males, like they may see the problem but they're not affected by it to the same degree, and to an extent, I mean, of course, I'm I try to be as realistic as possible while being optimistic. So I would like to believe that we can be allies on a similar level of understanding, but to a certain extent it feels like the gender ideology issues primarily affect women. I mean, if a
Yes.
trans-identified female goes into a men's locker room, they're not going to sexually assault or harass someone. There's discomfort, sure, but they're not going to offer that same degree of danger that a trans-identified male would offer in a female sex-separatist space. And so, to an extent, I mean, we are allies in that we both face a similar oppression for being same sex attracted, but there will always be a sort of separation because there's an additional oppression based on sex. And that's
Yeah,
something that you
absolutely.
can't ever really bridge because unless you're raised, you can't like just get rid of sex based like, how you were raised. You can't get rid of that. Like
Yeah.
even if you're aware of the ways that in which women are oppressed, you can't undo it. Even as a radical feminist, you still have like this discomfort with going against the grain, and that's not something you can ever really understand unless you are raised in that exact same way.
Yeah, absolutely. And like even aside from the whole like trans issue and stuff, gay men are very much raised with male socialization. They benefit greatly from male socialization and from the patriarchy, whether or not they want to acknowledge that and admit it. They're still men at the end of the day. Like, yes, they experience oppression because of their their sexuality, but they at the end of the day they can still fight back. They can still fight off another man. They're, yeah, like you said, they're not experiencing near the same level of the dangers that we do with heterosexual men, trans identified men, all that kind of thing. So yeah. And it's not to say, like I still very much love my gay male friends, the ones that I have, but I do have to keep them at an arm's length to an extent because um I can't have these type of conversations with them because even if they might sympathize with me, they just don't get it, And a lot of males are just inclined to um defend their fellow males. So that's just always going to be an issue.
And again, like on one hand, I do try to be as open minded as possible because I know that I feel like the older you get as someone who is radical feminist or same sex attracted, I feel like those two things are kind of like depending on how far you identify with it, are kind of interchangeable because they kind of lead you to the same kind of nihilism, I'd say. Like it just feels kind of it feels kind like you see the worst in people when you get to the root of it. Like I understand when people sometimes
Absolutely.
go through radical feminism and they just go, all men are evil and there's nothing we can do to change it and the world is just like this. And I understand how you get to that point, but I feel like we have to have some kind of hope in that sector. That there are men who will see our side. There are connections we can make with the opposite side. There is some kind of middle ground we can reach where everyone is at least somewhat better than we are today.
Yeah, like I'm very yeah, I'm open to like Yeah, I'm definitely open to like bridging the gap and all that, and like you said, finding common ground and working with those people that are willing to like be our allies. But the at the end of the day, I'm always there's going to be a part of me, a part of my mind that is just going to be very re- like reserve, like is going to have reservations, you know. I absolutely want to make it a team effort, you know, but I'm just no matter what, I'm always going to be suspicious of a man's motives.
And that's understandable. I feel like even especially in liberal spaces, you see a lot of men who are pro-abortion and but it's not because they believe that women have an inherent right to autonomy, that we have a right to our bodies being ours and ours alone. But for a lot of men, it's just a way to get out of being responsible for bringing children into the world.
Exactly.
And so like I'm glad for the support, but you have to consider what the intent is versus the end result. Because sometimes, yes, the end result is more important than the intent, but it's still important to recognize that there are people out here who are interested specifically because of their own interests, not because they care for us as people.
Yeah, exactly. And something else that I also like really struggle with. So I definitely I was in like I was very much lefty, like identified for a long time, you know? And I still am in terms of like a lot of the ideals that true leftism promotes, you know? And so like I've just a lot of like my favorite people on YouTube, you know, and you know, people that I would follow like on YouTube or like Twitter and stuff like that. I'm not really big on Instagram. I'm just like I'm weird. I'm kind of like in that age range of like I'm a little too old for like some social media platforms but not for others. I don't know. But anyways, the people that like I would follow prior to really me getting peaked and stuff like that, like I'm having a lot of struggle because I do still agree with and a lot of the stuff they say and stuff they talk about, and I like listening to them, but just because of the fact that they refuse to acknowledge the problematic nature of trans rights activism, and a lot of these people are people who pride themselves in being critical thinkers, but yet they just absolutely will not critically think about this about you know about trans rights activism. And you know you you claim that's why I'm like yeah dude, we don't have male allies specifically in like the liberal or leftist men like are not our allies because they just they want to pander, they want to pander to the lib fems, and they don't like being called out or told, hey, you're wrong about this, you need to, you know, like this is something that you should look into or examine, you know. And it's just put me off a lot of you know, it's just like you said, it gets lonely, it gets a little bit like it's isolating, it's frustrating because it's like these are people that have good ideas, but when it comes to this, they're staunch in their they're just blindly like supporting, you know, the trans movement.
I feel like that really stems from a desire, because as someone who is on the younger side of things, I am aware of my own desire to be liked by others. And it is an uncomfortable position to be in to realize that you are in a minority. And there are some aspects of your own identity that you can't change. Like, I can't change that I am black, or that I am disabled, or that I am gay. And so I understand why some women come into it and they see the way to make myself more easily liked, more, stand out less, is to agree with this popularly held point of view. I get it, but I also feel like a lot of people choose ideologies not because they actually agree with those principles, but because they are popularly held. They choose them because it's
Yeah,
easier than to go against the grain.
I mean, that's true. And when it comes to people who have like a very large following, like, of course, if they were to go gender critical, they're going to lose a big portion of their fan base. I get that, but it just frustrates me how people who specifically women, when women have an opposing viewpoint, and like we just immediately get, oh well, you must be like a right-wing radical, you must be part of the conservative right, and it's like, no, not at all, not at all. But these are the reasons. I think I have very valid reasons for being concerned about trans women in my spaces. And like, I get it. I get why they don't go against the grain to an extent. But with stuff that is so glaringly obvious, like Leah Thomas, like, come on, dude. How can you defend that? How can you honestly defend that? You know what I mean? Like, I get it. It's an unpopular opinion to have, but it's like, why is having unpopular opinions such a bad thing, when we get down to it, like, we as gender radical feminists or gender critical feminists, or for example, like JK Rowling, like, nothing that we say is actually harmful to trans people. It's just we're trying to maintain our sex-based rights, and there shouldn't be anything controversial about that.
I mean, there really shouldn't be anything that like none of what we're saying is out there in comparison to some of the takes I've seen from trans activists. I've seen some really violent, vile stuff that they say, and no one ever seems to call this out at all. Like they look at it and they see nothing wrong with people saying that they want to use turfs as cock sleeves or something. They say all these horribly sexist, violent things, and they tend to overlook it. And to an extent, I feel like a lot of women agree with this because either they're not fully educated, they're willfully ignorant. My mom is like this in some ways, and that like my dad will say something that is racist or sexist, and she just won't hear it because it's easier to ignore that it exists than it is to deal with the fact that it is there. I feel like there's
Yeah.
a quote by Dworkin that's like some women can't handle realizing how oppressed they are. And I feel like that really does go for a lot of women who support the movement. They don't want to face up to the fact that life is really that bad. They don't want to face how steep that uphill climb is. They'd rather just ignore it in whatever way they can. And the easiest
But
way to
it's
ignore it is to just go along with the flow.
Yeah, I agree, but it's also funny because at the same time, they will laugh at conservative women or like trad wife type women and be like, "Oh, they just don't want to acknowledge their oppression under the patriarchy." But at the same time, I get that it takes a while to kind of like change your way of thinking and come around to this, come around to the gender critical side of things, but it's just, yeah, when you see such like like with trans women in prisons, and the stuff all the shit you see on Twitter with TRAs, like with all their violent death threats and all that kind of stuff towards just women in general, just the ugly language they have towards women. And it's like, you don't see the male pattern behavior behind this, like, I don't know. It's just, once you've peaked and you're really like on the other side of things, it gets so frustrating.
I do feel like it's definitely more of a burden to have realized all that's wrong with the world because then you can't just blissfully go about your day and not realize that there are things that are wrong. Like I did speak to an older lesbian who she was more involved with her work than with the community for a long time, so she kind of missed all of the social change after uh, gay marriage is legalized. And so me and one of my friends were trying to explain to her like here's like and it felt like we were crazy trying to explain this stuff because if you're not in the know then it does sound like a conspiracy theory to be like there are people out there who have a vested interest in making sure people are lifelong patients because of transitioning. But we were trying to explain this to her, and she's just sitting there like astounded that we're in this position of having to argue that sex is a real thing, that there are observable forms of oppression, and it's just one of those things that's like I know I've said this many times before, but I feel like people in older generations had it a little bit easier in that at least no one was trying to argue that the oppression they faced wasn't real. And today, that's exactly what our battle is. It's not just trying to change the world that we're in, it's trying to convince the world that what we're experiencing is real. The elephant is sitting on our chest, and we can't even admit to that without someone telling us that no, we're lying.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've gone so far backwards in terms of like fighting for our rights and undoing a lot of the work that's been done by the generation of feminists before us. Like now, our rights, our bodily autonomy rights are being taken away in the United States, and we kind of have to like almost put that on hold so that we can like reclaim just womanhood and calling ourselves women and like and stuff like that. So it's just like it's doing us such a disservice in so many ways. And look, I get it if you're non-binary or you don't want to you know what I mean, you don't want to identify as a woman, like that's your choice, and you can call yourself whatever you want, but it's like you're also a very small minority, percentage of the population. So how dare you try to get like legalization changed, or you know what I mean, like stuff changed on the bigger, language changed as a whole. Like how dare you do that, and they say that they're like, well, if you want to call yourself a mother or a woman, that's fine, but you can't, they try to act like that's not what they're, it's like, yeah, that's fine, you can do that too, but you're trying to change it on a whole bigger scale, and that's not right. That's not right, particularly because the majority of us do not agree with this type of language. It's dehumanizing.
That's something that very much annoys me, and that, like, particularly in the US, using words like breeders or womb havers or whatever, that's dehumanizing. And it's always been an interest to me how the left likes to pretend that they're so conscientious, they're so woke, they so care about everyone's oppression. But the minute that someone says, hey, this is dehumanizing, I don't like this, why are we catering to this tiny minority, they lash out, and the end all of the argument is you're transphobic, and that shuts down the entire conversation. And that's something that I
Yeah,
sincerely hate, is that we can't even discuss our differences, because the moment that you say that's transphobic, you shut down. If you call someone racist, if you call someone homophobic, the conversation doesn't end on a dime like that. The only insult that really shuts down a conversation to that degree is transphobic. And so in the end,
abs-
we're just having this issue of like, I'm a black woman. I do not want to be called a breeder or a birth haver or a uterus owner
a
or whatever.
black birthing body.
But that's so dehumanizing. And if I say that's dehumanizing, they're coming at me and saying middle class white men don't like when you admit that oppression is a real thing, and so we're gonna shut you down for it. That's just, it's so
Yeah,
aggravating.
absolutely. And in the end, males are going to identify with other males, and although they may, continue chanting the mantra of trans women are women. Okay, but ask any heterosexual man, would you have a serious relationship with a trans woman unless you have that particular fetish? I don't think so. you know? And it just you know that deep down inside you see them as men too, and part of you may be consciously or unconsciously identify with that person as a male, just because that's how they're brought up. That's how they're brought up in this society.
Yeah, honestly, and I think people like to pretend that they're somehow. One of the things that annoys me most is this idea of individualism. Because, yes, we are
Yeah.
all individuals with a different experience of life, but in total, we are impacted by the society we live in, and we have more in common with other people on this earth than we do have different. And so, this idea that, like, our experience is just so independent, so different, it prevents us from seeing this overarching trend of behavior. It's almost impossible to call out these trends of behavior. Like if you look at with like social, like superstars or whatever, Ezra Miller, or I forgot which rapper it was that recently came out as non-binary after abusing his girlfriend. Like we're not allowed to call out these trends. Instead, we're bowing down to the power of language, and that's very
Yeah.
it's very aggravating to not be able to admit these are men doing male pattern violence things, and this is an observable pattern. We can't even do that anymore.
Oh, and that's another thing. That's another one of my biggest pet peeves, or that sticks in my craw, is when you're prioritizing their pronouns over the shit that they actually did. It's like, and it's, I would have to say it's mostly a lot of the younger people, or people that are just like like terminally online, as the kids say, um are the ones that are like really perpetuating this thing. But it just blows my mind having to well, I mean, I don't have to argue, but getting into these online arguments with people about like, oh, but you still have to respect their pronouns. It's like, no, the fuck, I don't. This person is obviously male. They present as whether they're not, they identify as non-binary or a trans woman. They're 100% male in every aspect and commit male pattern violence. I'm not going to respect their she her pronouns. Like, no.
Especially with like the Chris Chan trial. I remember that was like you can very much see my like process of like formally peeking through my channel, because I went from like reviewing Steven Universe cartoons to commentating on societal issues. And remember one of my earlier videos was on Chris Chan, and I was like, he deserves to be castrated. And some people in the comment section were like arguing over, oh, well, it's easy for you to say that because you're a woman. And it's like, no, it's easy for me to say that because I'm not a rapist and I'm not a rapist supporter. If you don't have commonality with men like that, then you see no reason to give them mercy.
Yeah, no. Well, and honest, but I have to say though, I I don't agree with the sentiment behind that statement. Oh, it's easy for you to say because you're a woman. But yeah, because I'm a woman and I see firsthand the violence perpetuated against us, not just against us as grown women, but children, girls especially, little girls especially. Yes, I very much do want to um commit violent acts against these abusive men. Do I actually like carry those thoughts out like men do? Do we do that on the same level that men do? Absolutely not. But I do agree that, as I do think that as a woman, um yes, I don't want to use the word entitled, but I very much do um think those type of thoughts because of the shit I've either experienced firsthand or witnessed firsthand, secondhand, what have you, and all other types of ways.
Well, I've had a wonderful conversation with you, and I'm so sorry to cut you short after appearing to this interview late, but I have an interview I have to get to.
Oh,
um,
that's okay. I actually I have somewhere I'm gonna be in like half an hour. I'm gonna be a little bit late, but it's okay. It's been really great talking to you.
yeah, of course. And if
I
you want
don't
to
know
talk
if
again, I would happily do this again next Tuesday. I'd be happy to try again.
that's great. That's great. And when you post this, I'm gonna leave my Twitter handle in the comments for anybody who might want to follow me on Twitter. I've been getting really big into Twitter Spaces, so that's helping me with getting more comfortable with like speaking, like my speaking about stuff. And
Well, good luck
yeah,
to you.
so
Twitter is Twitter is a swamp for me.
yeah,
I avoid it.
yeah, it can be a lot. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and leave that. So if any of my fellow Radfems want to follow me, and I've really enjoyed speaking with you. And yeah, let's definitely do this again next Tuesday. I'll be here.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for speaking with me, and of course, I will link your Twitter in the description. And I hope to speak to you soon.
Okay, definitely. Take care of yourself in the meantime. Bye bye.